All right, welcome folks. Welcome everybody who's joining. People are going to keep filtering in for a couple of minutes. So before we get started, I'll just do a few housekeeping things. I wanted to welcome everybody to this VCLN workshop and also encourage you all to put your name and where you're coming from in the chat so we know who's joining us today. Yeah, welcome folks. Please put your name and where you're joining from in the chat so we know who's here. And a few other housekeeping notes. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted publicly to the VCLN library Facebook, or sorry, not Facebook, on YouTube, as well as on our website. That'll go up within a couple days and we'll send the recording out to you as well. So you will get a recording and some notes from this. We'll also ask you to raise your hands and wait to be called on if you want to ask questions. You can put questions in the chat, but please avoid using the chat as a place for crosstalk because we want to really stay focused on the conversation that's happening live. And then last but not least, let me know if you're having any technical issues today. You can message me directly is usually the best way. Yeah, folks are still filtering in. Welcome, folks. Please introduce yourself in the chat. This is going to be a little repetitive for some of you. You just heard me say all this, but welcome. I'm going to put this in the chat as well. Put your name in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. And please remember to raise your hand to be called on to ask questions of the panelists. Yeah, try to avoid some crosstalk in the chat. We want to keep the conversation focused on what's happening in real time. And we will be breaking out into breakout groups later in the workshop. So you'll have a chance to have more of a conversation in a little bit. We'll start with some panelist discussion. And things are slowing down. I think we probably have some critical mass here. So I'm gonna hand it over to Jess now. Some folks will still keep filtering in and I'll keep letting them know what they can do in the chat. But yeah, I'm going to hand it off to Jess.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see so many people today on a rainy, thundery in some places. Thunderstorms came through my neck of the woods last night, morning here in Vermont. Yeah, I'm seeing 2 full pages of folks and really excited to have so many folks able to join us today. So my name is Jessica Savage, and I am the Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives here at VCRD, the Vermont Council on Rural Development. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar. If you don't know who we are here at VCRD, we're an independent nonprofit organization, actively nonpartisan, dedicated to the support of the locally defined progress in Vermont's rural communities. We're a dynamic partnership of federal, state, local, nonprofit, and private partners. I see many of you on the call, so thanks for being here. One of VCRD's roles is to bring Vermonters together when big changes are happening and affecting rural communities. And now is no different. As we know, the federal transition is already impacting rural communities and the programs and services that people rely on. Today, we might not have all the answers, but right now we know we can connect, we can learn from each other, we can work together, regardless of our political opinions. This is a moment where we can come together. And certainly everyone I'm talking to is craving that right now. So we hope that you feel that today, a bit of connection with your fellow Vermonters. So in democracy, all citizens are called upon to lead. You are no different. I am no different. When leaders step up, we achieve great things. Motivated by a love for our communities, local leaders throughout Vermont are constructing their futures, building momentum, and making democracy real. Today, as much as any time in our recent history, Vermonters are working together to respond to the challenges that they're experiencing and building the foundations of our communities and our state for a more resilient future. This network of Vermont community builders today here, the Vermont Community Leadership Network, is an important venue to bring your voice, thoughts, questions, and ideas to. The Vermont Community Leadership Network connects and supports local leaders as they build local projects, organizations, and systems that serve their communities and Vermont's urgent and long-term needs. The network supports members with various workshops like this one and resources such as our Community Leadership Guide for advancing leadership and community projects. If you want to join the network, many of you already are part of the network. Lauren can put a link in the chat for us, where you can also find access to all the recorded workshops that we've done over the past several years. So as you listen, share, and reflect today, I ask you to think about what you need right now, what your community needs right now. What types of resources, convenings, or something else are you looking for? VCRD and other service providers are here listening and thinking about how we can support you. Before we get started, I just want to recognize that some of what we're talking about might feel difficult, or everyone might have different thoughts and feelings and experiences about this moment. So we ask people to please be respectful, even if we're expressing those different opinions, and to practice stepping up and stepping back. So that means if you're somebody who tends to talk a lot, maybe you could be in an active listening mode today more. Or if you're somebody who tends to be hesitant to speak up, you could be a little braver today and take the risk. Say what you need to say. You can use the chat, like Lauren said, and we do ask you to raise your hand when the time comes for that. But know that these agreements apply in the chat as well. Like Lauren said, let's keep the crosstalk to a minimum. Plus, it gets distracting when everyone's talking in the chat and not engaging with each other in the other ways. Okay, so with that, I'd love to welcome our panelists. And oh my gosh, when I turn my screen on, it's just so many friendly faces. I love it. And panelists, what we're going to do first is I'm going to kind of run through our run of show for today. So our agenda for today is pretty simple. So good news, you're not going to have to listen to me for too much more. You're going to hear from our wonderful panelists. They're going to introduce themselves and we're going to ask just a couple of questions. We'll spend, maybe 30 minutes in a panel kind of format, right? And then it's going to be time to hear from you. And you're going to get to choose based on the panelists we're going to hear from, representing different sectors. You can choose where you want to go. Do you want to go talk more with Martin about the nonprofit sector? Do you want to go talk to Melissa more about the business sector? Chris about the state sector? Different sectors is what we're really here to focus on today. And so you'll have a chance to really hear from each other and have these panelists listen to you. And that was something when we asked them if they wanted to do this with us. It was very obvious that they wanted to hear more from you. And we know right now this is a good moment for you all to hear from each other as well. So we hope that format works for folks. So you'll get to choose your breakout group. And then we'll come back and the VCRD staff who have been taking notes during those breakout groups will do a little report out, and then we'll have some time for a brief Q&A before we say goodbye at around 1 o'clock today. So that's our plan. Sound good? All right. So with that, my wonderful panelists here, I'd love to invite them to introduce themselves. So what I'll do is I'll call on you panelists and you could just say your name, pronoun, organization, and any other information background you want to have. Like, why did we ask you to be here today? It'd be great to hear that from your perspective. And Martin, you came off mute, so would you like to go first?
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see some folks here I haven't seen in a while. I'm Martin Hahn. I'm the director of Common Good Vermont, and Common Good Vermont is a statewide association of nonprofit organizations.
Thanks, Martin. Chris, would you go next?
Hey everybody, great to see everybody, and I too recognize so many people I haven't seen in a while, so thanks. Great to see you. My name is Chris Cochran. I am the Director of Community Planning and Revitalization, and I work within the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Melissa.
I'm Melissa Bounty, the Executive Director of Central Vermont Economic Development Corporation, one of the 12 RDCs of Vermont.
Thanks, Melissa. And Bonnie.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Waninger. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the project and funding specialist at the Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
Thanks, Bonnie. So as you can hear, we've got folks representing the nonprofit sector, the business for-profit sector, the state sector, and the municipal sector. And we thought that was a nice way to kind of frame this conversation for this moment for rural Vermont. So with that, I'd love to dive right in. So this is a question that's going to go to each panelist here. We'd love to hear from you. What are the impacts that your sector is feeling right now? What are some challenges or opportunities, some bright spots or things that are your sector seems to be struggling with? I'd love to start with, maybe we'll go backwards from what we just did. So Bonnie, would you like to go first?
Sure. Sorry, I lost my notes there. So in my world, when I talk about grants, I'm talking about state and federal funding that passes to municipalities through a project-specific grant, like a sidewalk grant, as well as annual grants, things like state payments in aid, or while it's not quite municipality funding that comes to schools through the state from the federal government. Municipalities are experiencing a number of things I'll start with kind of the less positive. Some municipalities are seeing loss of grant funds that end a project in the middle of construction. Others have projects put on hold where they expected an award and they're not certain they're going to get it anymore. So that leaves them in a place of uncertainty. They're needing to find a plan B when their funding is rescinded. They're also seeing slower payments or temporary holds on payments, which can affect their cash flow, especially for those municipalities that were affected by the 2023 or 2024 floods. They're also not hearing much from their federal agency partners, or the partners that remain lack the knowledge to actually respond to their questions. And generally, they're seeing slower response time for any actions and a general uncertainty about whether a specific grant or grants generally will be available to advance their priority projects. I'm trying to think of some bright spots here, Jess. We didn't talk about them before, but I would say that the bright spots are that you remember that those federal folks who you work with and those state folks that you work with, they are trying their best to be as helpful as they can. And even when municipalities or others get frustrated, those folks are generally there. And even if they can't provide information, are reassuring that the needs of local communities are at least being heard, even if at the moment they can't quite respond to them.
Thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate that perspective.
Sorry,
And
did
adding.
you want lessons learned too, or just impact?
We'll talk about that next. Yeah, I just kind of want to hear the impacts generally. What's the temperature of your sector? Yeah, so really appreciate that, Bonnie. And Melissa.
So my organization represents business owners in Washington County and part of Orange County, so just for central Vermont. And we define a business owner as any size of business owners. So that would include sole proprietors, people who do this type of work. So it may be people who depend on grant writing or grant facilitation as their livelihood, which would obviously be a directly impacted sector. But overall, when I look at the Central Vermont business community, I think desire for guidance is the biggest ask. What is going on? What do we need to do to be compliant? And what do we need to do to properly manage our resources and understand what to expect. So managing cash flow in unpredictable times is a big topic, and also responding to the sort of mental tax of the constantly changing environment. We are also very responsive to the 23 and 24 floods. The whole landscape has organized into what could be considered a bright spot, I guess, in that we have gone through some really challenging things in the recent past, and that means that the lines of communication within the state and within the region are clear and available. So I think we do understand how to get together and do something hard, because we've just done that. And I have good partners and alliances that are working to respond to these needs. But right now, we're just information gathering and understanding what it is that people need to be effective as a business owner in this moment.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks for all you're doing. Chris, I believe you're next.
Me. So a little bit more about what I do to kind of explain kind of some of the topics that I'm going to bring up as far as the federal funding landscape. So we focus on kind of downtown and village center community revitalization activities. So while we're in the Commerce Agency, kind of a lot of the policies kind of flow through us. So we're kind of in this nexus between VTrans, A&R, HUD, and kind of all these different agencies, because all these programs do have to come together to kind of effectively work on the ground in your community and make something happen. I'm going to start with some better news because there's not a lot. So I'm trying to start with a hopeful note. HUD, there's a major funder of housing in the state. And we just recently got some news that HUD also administers disaster recovery funds, and so the state is poised to receive $67 million in federal recovery dollars. The funding is going to be directed to the most impacted communities from the 2023 and 2023 floods. So most of the funding is going to go to Washington and Lamoille counties, but there is a statewide benefit and opportunity for communities to engage around that to address their needs. The unfortunate thing is the staff and the team at HUD who was supposed to administer this funding, I think most of them were fired. While it's good to know that we have this money, the timeline of when this funding is going to come to the state is a little uncertain. But we hope fall or winter this year, and I think it will help many of our communities kind of build back better and stronger from the floods. Transportation is another big issue. Many of our communities are working hard to reduce their emissions. They're working hard to transform our infrastructure of cars that are gas powered into ones that are using electricity. A lot of the federal funding for this kind of transformation is just basically on hold. We do expect the money will come back, but I think it's going to take quite a long time. And a kind of a concerning change to me is federal policy that's really now going to be focused on roads and bridges, because so many of our communities, especially our small towns, it's these trail networks, it's the, recreational economy that really is their lifeblood. And I'm very concerned about kind of changes in these funding priorities, how they're going to affect our smaller towns. From the environmental perspective, I think Vermont has a very strong state foundation for stewardship of our environment and protection of our environment. So I don't see a lot of changes there, federal changes affecting state laws and how we do things in Vermont, but changes rollbacks into coal-fired power plants. We all breathe the same air, so that is going to have an effect on Vermont. Some good news in this response in this area, brownfield investments will continue. So we are going to continue to invest in cleaning up our cities and towns and creating new opportunities for housing and businesses within our city centers. And it does appear our funding for water and wastewater infrastructure remains solid. So communities that are working to plan and implement and design improvements or repairs to existing systems should have funding on the horizon. I'll end with kind of my biggest concern is I think many of our small communities really depend on the Rural Development Office, so USDA Rural Development. Kind of before the change in Washington. I think the staff had about 60% of their capacity needs being met. And I think we've lost, I don't know, 4 or 5 staff in this transition. And they're huge. They are the kind of the connectors to our small towns and helping them access resources for infrastructure, for housing, helping our farmers. And I think we've got some good ideas how to step in and replace them, but it is a concern that I have. How do we continue to support the needs of our small towns absent any kind of state capacity or federal capacity to support things you want to do? I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And thanks to everything your department does. It's very impactful to rural Vermont. Martin, tell us about the nonprofit sector.
So again, Martin Hahn, Common Good Vermont, we're a state association of nonprofit organizations. We do training and education programming, advocacy work, and convening. And it's fair to say that nonprofits have been significantly impacted over the last, feels like years, but it's been 2 months. Since taking office, the Trump administration has initiated significant changes impacting nonprofits. A slew of executive orders and actions impacting nonprofits directly and indirectly have been issued, although many of these are being litigated. When I'm done speaking, I'll put a link in the chat for a list of the executive orders. These actions have generated a great deal of uncertainty for nonprofits around funding, staffing, and their ability to carry out their missions. Many organizations are already feeling the impact on their organizations and the communities they serve. Organizations, particularly those with federal grants or contracts, and those working on specific issues or in a subsector targeted by executive orders, are in a period of retrenchment. I would put in 3 buckets, and we probably could dice it in a lot of different ways, but 3 buckets of how the federal actions are impacting nonprofits. One is you have organizations that have been awarded federal funds, contracts been signed, the work has begun. They go to the portal to access to submit a reimbursement request, and they're locked out. So they've done the work that we've asked of them, but the funding is not available to reimburse for costs that have been incurred. Secondly, there are contracts that have just been simply terminated. An organization that has been awarded federal funds will get a letter that says, per this executive order, this contract is now no longer in effect. And then lastly, the third area is around executive orders around how organizations manage their work. Specifically, I'm talking about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and gender related issues, and how organizations respond to those. And so that falls into a real gray area. If your organization is involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion work that's not funded by federal funds, are you still at risk? And the answer appears to be yes, although that again is also being litigated. So Common Good Vermont has been soliciting information from organizations and how they're impacted. And I have one that I'm going to call out right now. I've asked Ivy from Hunger Free Vermont, if you could just speak real briefly about how your organization has been impacted.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Martin. Hi, everybody. I'm Ivy. I'm the SNAP Policy and Training Lead at Hunger Free Vermont. We are a statewide anti-hunger advocacy and education organization engaged in state and federal policy advocacy, as well as community education about the root causes of hunger, its solutions, as well as education about federal nutrition programs that exist now to support food security for, tens of thousands of Vermonters. And so in my capacity, I'm focused on the federal SNAP program. SNAP and Medicaid are 2 of the most important federal programs to support food security and healthcare needs of lower income folks. And they are the 2 programs really that congressional Republicans are proposing to target, to make really deep, devastating cuts to both programs through reconciliation in order to fund tax breaks for wealthy people. And so both, the conversations around proposed cuts and the total uncertainty about whether the federal contract we hold to inform the public about SNAP and train people to support folks to apply will be honored if we'll actually be able to draw down those funds from the federal government. You know, both of those things are affecting our work every day, and we frankly expect all of this to get a lot worse over the summer. And so just from our perspective, you know, we think state government, the legislature, really needs to have a plan that includes raising additional revenue now to mitigate the enormous harm to lower income and otherwise vulnerable folks in our communities. Because we can, I mean, it's easy to fall into, you know, fear mindset, and that's very understandable, but policymakers really can't take that fear-based or scarcity-based approach right now because so many Vermonters will really suffer. So yeah, thanks for letting me share a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks for speaking up, Ivy. I think if we talk about really basic human needs, shelter, food, healthcare, there are significant risks in the future. So I do have some lessons learned, but I'll save those for later. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Ivy. That was a surprise guest for us to have you come pop in and speak from the perspective of Hunger Free Vermont. So yeah, I think, you know, this is a tough moment, right? I mean, I think all of us are struggling with a little bit of fear, uncertainty, and we work in rural Vermont. We work in towns where there's lots of different experiences happening as well, where you know, this is a moment of these are changes that are either not maybe anticipated or expected, but also welcome changes as well, some of them, right? At the same time, I think it's a moment where we're noticing the impacts on individual households and communities writ large. It's, for better or for worse, not the first time that many of us have experienced big changes or big moments of like, oh, this is happening now. I mean, in recent years, we've lived in unprecedented times. I tell people I'm really tired of parenting during unprecedented times, but here we are in 2025. You know, we've experienced flooding twice here in Vermont. We've experienced the pandemic. We've experienced some big things in the past, you know, 5 to 10 years. So I'm curious, given that here we are again in a big moment of transition and change. I'm curious to hear from guests briefly about what what you yourself or your organization might be drawing on. And you've touched on this a little bit, some of you, what lessons learned from some of those other moments that we've all experienced are useful right now that you might be drawing on. And let's maybe go, we'll shake it around a little bit. And I'd love to go to Melissa first, if that's all right.
So as I was mentioning, guidance being a primary concern, I have been reflecting on how we went from, at CVEDC, at my organization, from seeking guidance during the flood to becoming the voice of guidance during the flood, and what that looked like and meant. It was an important role for my organization to play. We aggregated information from our partners, vetted it, and tried to communicate it in clear language, making sure that we did that in a comprehensive way that was responsive to language barriers, the need for interpretation, and that continues to be true. When I meet with business owners, they often want guidance, and then they want guidance that they can specifically understand and use for their particular business situation. So I'm working with employers that have questions about the visa status and permission of their employees. We have employees that are going home abroad and to have a visit because they're concerned about their ability to visit their family members abroad over the next 4 years, and then they're coming back into the country. I am getting a text this moment from an employer in that situation who is confirming to me that her employee did return from abroad successfully, and it's emotional every time. So this, like the flood, was an emotionally high time with a lot of change and variability. We heard during the flood that access to mental health and substance use support was the primary request that we had by business owners. And we had a lot of good resources for that during the flood. Washington County Mental Health did step up to offer a fairly low impact, easy to access mental health support. And I will continue to look for those resources that people tell me that they need. Obviously, funding is a primary thing that people look for. But when I hear these common themes that language access, simplified information, and those wraparound services or secondary services that we don't always associate with business support, such as mental health support, substance use support, that those are things we need to be very aware of during times of change and unpredictability and 1,000-year types of floods or other events. When we're in those really unpredictable times, making sure that we resource the needs and encourage people to feel comfortable to speak out. Every single person that came to me during the flood and said that they needed mental health support would often buffer that by saying, this is really weird and this is such a strange thing to say to you. And I would say, actually, this is the most common thing that I'm being asked for. We're all human beings, and we aren't a bunch of AI bodies, and we can't respond in a non-human way. So I'm encouraging all of my business owners to be kind to themselves and to ask for the things that they need, and never to feel like there's anything weird or too unique about the request. I've heard about truly unique industry specific requests. We get this specific material or product from this specific country, and we are confused about what to do. And then I hear things that feel very personal, but are very universal. And as a service provider, just the most useful thing for me is for people to be open and communicate what's going on for them. And when it comes together in aggregate, and I hear that a real body of people is responding in a certain way with a certain need, we can go access that. And the state does empower us as RDCs and to be responsive in ways that we didn't predict that we'd need to be.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Melissa. Appreciate that perspective. Normalizing that we're all humans in this experience here. Chris, would you like to go next? I see you're off mute.
Oh, sure. I should have been on mute, then I didn't know. Sorry. Yeah, I think we've all been through good times and bad times. And, I think the state strategy in this moment is, get the money that we can. So we are actively working to draw down as much federal funds as we can, because we don't know what the next day is going to look like. We know what we need to do, and we know what our missions is. So our focus is really kind of just to bend where we need to, but absolutely not break. And in lean times before, really, I think it drove Vermont to collaborate and innovate in a lot of different ways. And I think that's just the mindset that we are in. You can look at constraints as barriers, or you can look at constraints as opportunities to rethink how you do business and how you operate as a group and how you work with your partners. So that's one of the things that we're focused on right now. And I think some folks from the Leahy Institute are on this call, and I just really want to thank them for supporting an initiative that we're working on to really take a look at our ecosystem of how we serve and support our small towns and our under-resourced communities to enable them to identify their priorities, scope their projects, and achieve their goals. So we're launching kind of a big conversation this summer, and we want to hear from everybody about what's working and what's not, and where there are good models and opportunities for us to provide better services, more strategic services, and support kind of the good work you do in communities. This conversation involves a lot of the people on this call. I see like VLCT, UVM, BCRD, VHCB, and many, many others to hear from you about what changes are needed. This will result, I think, in some a report and legislation kind of on how the state can be more self-reliant in how it provides services to our small towns. And it will conclude in a summit in Randolph, and I want to invite you all to come in, I think it's November 6th, an all-day summit to kind of review preliminary findings and recommendations for the General Assembly to consider. So I think out of this adversity, we're trying to find new ways to meet our challenges. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And that's been a really, really great project. And I am excited to start hearing from community leaders about the services that many of us try to provide. So, Bonnie, would you go next? Tell us what lessons learned you're drawing on right now.
I am drawing on lessons learned from the early to mid 90s downsizing of federal government. It was a little less severe, but equally impactful. And at the time, I was a federal employee who was downsized or outsized. I'll call it that. I was only a 4-year term position and my term came up and I couldn't be made permanent. So what I remember from that time and talking to municipalities about now is the word patience. And it's very hard to be patient when you're seeing your funding disappear or be uncertain and you have a road to pave or a bridge to build. But administration transitions happen every time and they last at least 6 months, pretty much through that September 30th end of federal fiscal year. And I'm not in any way guaranteeing you things will be all set in 6 months, but rather that some of the freezing, the unthawing, the rescinded grants, you'll probably have a better idea than what's permanent and what's temporary and what's been challenged legally, what's been simply resolved by Congress working with the president and kind of heading in the direction that they're probably going to head as more of a permanent place. Within all that, 6 months is a long time, so you need a plan B, and you probably need a plan C. So think about what you'll do if your federal funding is rescinded, if it's been frozen, or if it's simply no longer possible to obtain because that grant you were going to go for, that funding or loan you were going to pursue isn't there anymore. So plan Bs, plan Cs, you've got to be adaptable. Know that some of us that we see here today are going to lose our jobs, and that's very scary. And federal folks have already lost their jobs. While that's a difficult thing to face, it's also an opportunity for change and to reassess what your goals are. Maybe you thought you'd be with an organization for life, or at least for 5 years. Look around now. What other possibilities are out there, and spend some time thinking about what you want as you move to next steps. It is a scary place to be. We generally make it through it, and you generally do that with your network of family and friends and contacts that you have. If you lose your job, don't be afraid to reach out to people and say, what have you seen on the ground, and to tell people. We tend to be hesitant to say, I lost my job, I got laid off, especially if my notice says, I'm trying to think what it said, for poor performance when you've only had great performance evaluations. It's okay to tell people that you've lost your job. Most your friends, your families, your contacts will be on the lookout for you. Another one is that communication and knowledge are essential. You've heard Melissa and Chris and others talk about their networks. Know who your go-to people are that have answers to your questions or can find you those answers. Yes, chaos is reigning right now, but there are some answers out there. And we were approached, or I was approached yesterday, day before, by an organization who had a direct federal grant. And they turned in their paperwork in early January. They have been waiting. They're just waiting for reimbursement, and they've heard nothing, and no emails are being responded to. So in that case, I was able to reach out to the National League of Cities who had firsthand information about what's happening with that grant. So use those networks you have and know people who can answer your questions. And finally, I'd say watch the trends. So there are trends developing. You see some in the executive orders, you see some in the analysis in memos. There are a lot of people monitoring those. You don't need to read them all yourself. Go to your network. One of the things that we're noticing in the world of grants is that compliance with terms of and conditions of grants is going to be a focus. You always needed to be compliant with your grant, right? You needed to do all those things. But now, if you were required to have a policy, you better have one. If you were required to do something when you hired a contractor, you need to have done those things, to have tracked that you did it, and to have documented. So documentation proving you did something is going to become pretty critical. So you need to think about complying with what you were required to do before the transition happened. But you also, so for there, I'll use an example. In federal grants, you're required when you purchase to take certain steps to engage small and socioeconomic type businesses in contracts. So think of women-owned, small business, veteran-owned, labor market areas, and I'm missing one, minority-owned businesses. You were required to try and give them an opportunity to bid on your contract. You've always been required to do that, and by law, you're still required to do that. However, some federal agencies are starting to signal by sending out memos that they're no longer going to monitor that. And I know several grantees who will say, great, that's great, now we don't have to do that. But that's not actually the case. You still need to do that. They're just not going to monitor you doing that. But that doesn't mean 3 weeks from now, they're not going to start monitoring. So
yeah.
So just keep
Bonnie.
that in mind. Yep.
Yeah. No, I appreciate this example, and I don't mean to interrupt you at all. But just we're running a little behind, so I want to make sure we save time for the breakouts, because I can see how many people are on the call and getting ready to talk to one another, and in the chat as well. So really appreciate your reflections there and all that you're doing to support municipalities. And certainly VLCT is one of those trusted partners you can turn to if you work for a municipality or are a select board member. Martin, really quickly, would you reflect on what you've been through a lot of transition yourself, so curious what you're using in this moment.
Well, just coming fairly recently from the floods, there are two things that I see in action. One is it's on a very discouraging call with executive directors who are talking about the impacts of their organization, but then it quickly turned when they the conversation turned when they started talking about mutual aid. And this was really critical piece of the flooding response was, how can I support my neighbor in this moment? And organizations are really stepping into that. It's not just about me and my organization, but it's about my community as well. So secondly is I'm seeing increased collaboration between philanthropic community and the nonprofit sector. So the foundations, business giving, individual giving is really stepping up in a pretty significant way. It's not going to fill all the gaps, but there's a really strong alliance that's taking shape. And that's it for me, Jessica.
Thanks. Really appreciate that, Martin. Okay. Well, thanks to our panelists, and you're going to get to spend more time with at least one of them right now. And with that, I will turn to Lauren to tell us how we're going to do this.
Yeah, great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into breakout groups. Everybody is going to get to choose their breakout group except for the panelists and some VCRD staff. And what we're going to have, the menu of options, there are going to be 4 breakout groups. Each one will be moderated by one of our panelists. And you'll get a chance they'll probably have some questions for you, like they're thinking about their community, their sector, and they might have some questions for you guys to think about and sort of share with each other as peers, because this is a moment to ask the panelists questions, but also to ask each other questions, because what we've been hearing is that people really need a chance to connect, talk to their peers, think about how they can address the ways that they need to adapt in this moment. So your menu of options, again, are going to be let's see, Melissa is going to be leading the discussion about business and workforce communities. Chris is going to be leading a discussion about community planning and development. Bonnie is going to be holding space for the folks who want to talk about municipalities. And Martin is going to be holding a space for people who want to talk about the effects of nonprofits and that sort of nonprofit philanthropy alliance. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms now. And you're going to see that you have that option to choose. And you can start heading there. We're going to be there for about 30 minutes. And then I will give you a little warning before we close them. And we'll come back with some 10 minutes to share back together. So go ahead and choose your breakout room. And as you head over there, our panelists are going to moderate those spaces and start you off. Welcome back, folks. Thanks for coming back. I hope that was a fruitful discussion for you all, and that maybe you got some resources or some contacts that are going to help you going forward. I'm going to invite our panelists to say sort of maybe a couple sentences, high-level overview of what they were hearing, and then if VCRD staff want to add on anything, I'll rotate through each group and just give us a chance to hear from each other and kind of cross-pollinate a little bit across the different sectors and different conversations that were happening. So Melissa, can I start with you? I was in your group and listening to a really interesting sort of regional conversation. And yeah, could you give us some high-level thoughts that you're taking away from that?
Definitely. So we talked about business and workforce response, and we heard from the Northeast Kingdom, as well as someone coming from the town of Alburgh. So some different location perspectives, but the themes were similar and shared, that there's a need for investment in infrastructure like childcare to support business and workforce, and that investments need to be made to support good wage paying jobs, both so that the workforce can afford to participate effectively in the community and make a good wage and have a good living, but also for people who are interested in entrepreneurship, that there's enough access to capital to access entrepreneurship. And we talked about some specific programs, the Small Business Technical Assistance Exchange, which we're working on to support business owners who are expanding, the Northeast Kingdom's pitch competition, which links new entrepreneurs. And then there was a resource that Annie, who's left, dropped into the chat about opening your own child care, very small child care facility. So I know that child care is such a common theme. I think that's a good resource to check out.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just echo, I thought I heard a lot about sort of regional collaboration and how important that is. Danny, is there anything you'd like to add real quick?
Melissa hit a lot of really great points, and I was hearing a lot of stuff about collaboration as well. In short, I really feel like the key points were that cities and towns really need to invest in their local economies and ensure that they are doing what they need to do to strengthen the businesses and the workforces in their communities in order to sustain a prosperous future. That would be what I took from the conversation today.
Thanks. Yeah, great. I'd like to turn to Chris next. Chris, can you give us sort of a high-level overview? I know you had quite a big group, but yeah, any key takeaway thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody kind of shared a little bit of their frustration that, the reality is that there's likely going to be fewer federal resources and less federal capacity and local capacity to get things done. So what do you do? And I think the unfortunate thing is nobody really has a great answer. But I think some of the thoughts that we had, if you can't get it all done, how do you prioritize? And I think we kind of ended, and I'm going to lean on Keziah to actually fill in some of these other details. We are all thankful we live in Vermont. We all are very connected to each other. We all know how to work together, and we all know how to find innovative solutions. So given these constraints, we have to find a way forward to continue doing the work that matters because we just don't have any options.
Yeah, Keziah, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that was a great summary. We talked about creative partnerships, we talked about volunteer fatigue, different funding models. But I think the note that we ended on was that crisis can bring opportunity, and to resist where you can and act locally. And I just I took a note that's somewhat of a summarized quote from someone that I want to say quickly, which is sort of a final thought and a call to action, that there's nothing like a threat to help mobilize us. We as Vermonters know how to come together in a crisis. Each of us in some small way needs to do something extra, a donation, planting some extra food. Ask yourself, what is one small thing that I do well, and decide to be active in that. It was a positive thing to think about.
Yeah, I appreciate that positive thinking, that call to action, and yeah, I appreciate you guys sharing the voices of those in your breakout group. Thanks. Bonnie, I'd love to hear your high level takeaways. What were you talking about in the municipalities group? I'm sure there was lots.
We spent a lot of time talking about the impacts particular municipalities are feeling or thinking about into the future. And a lot of it has to do with projects that are in the works right now, that either what is happening with current funding or what will be happening. These are housing and flood recovery, energy, generally community sustainability. How do municipalities provide that infrastructure or plan for long-term recovery when they're uncertain what the funding will be? And I think Lisa had the best comment related, kind of summing it up from her perspective in Waterbury and a project they're having, which is that, municipal decision making was always complicated. This has added a new degree of complication to it as they try and move big projects forward, where you might not need your funding for 5 years, but you need to know it's there when you move.
Yeah, thanks for naming this, what's at stake here as well. Alyssa, is there anything you'd like to add in?
I think we really just saw the mosaic of impacts, everything from funding for EV chargers that is no longer coming through to this level of uncertainty that Bonnie's speaking about, whether it's about future long-term projects. Dam removals was one that was named a couple of times, particularly for flood response. But I would say the most lasting impression for me was that we did some real-time problem solving on the call. So shout out to our small and mighty municipality group. Bonnie was real-time providing updates about what things were actually maybe state funding and wasn't actually at risk. And so I'm really leaving with the impression that this idea to reach out to the contacts that you do have is just so important in this moment. We were, again, doing that real-time problem solving. Folks will tell you they don't know if they don't know, but they might, in some cases, be able to provide some reassurance. So just that reminder to reach out to folks with questions.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder. That's such a good one. And the whole reason we wanted to have this call was about that connection. So I'm glad that that came out. All right, Martin, I'll turn to you last. Will you share some takeaways from the nonprofits group?
I have a list of takeaways. We're short on time, so I'm going to just call out one. And I hope Denise, will Denise get the floor at some point? Hi, Denise.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Issue of we needed to use an equity lens. Not everybody is impacted equally and evenly. So depending on gender, race, historic ancestry, people are now feeling and will feel the impacts differently, and we need to be alert to that response. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. And Jessica, would you add to that at all?
Yeah, I think one thing that was clear is that art is really important in this moment. It's National Poetry Month, which we were reminded of, and that art is important to rural communities and in terms of community vitality. And then we really did talk about equity. People who are already under-resourced feel the brunt of resource loss first and foremost, and it takes a while to see that if you're not experiencing that firsthand. And so I think the call to action in the group was about how can we each step up to learn how to take on some of the responsibilities that right now a lot of the nonprofits play, especially when it comes to paying attention to the health and safety of our more under-resourced community members. And that might look like some of the call to action ideas that came from one of the other groups. But yeah, it was a great discussion. And we also, there are some great resources that Common Good has to offer. And generally, as Lauren put in the chat, any resources that are shared here and a recording of this will all get shared with everybody. So yeah, Lauren, back to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm just going to put the link to the leadership network in the chat again and hand it off to Denise to close us out.
I had to find my mute button. Well, I just want to say I'm Denise. If you don't know me, I'm the executive director of VCRD, and I just want to express tremendous gratitude to everybody who joined this call today, for being part of this conversation, and for linking arms. I also just want to say, if there's anything that you think VCRD should be doing to support you, to support your organization, please let us know. We're listening right now is what I want to say, and we're listening to a lot of different people. We know the stress that is being caused by the federal transition. We're really grateful that we were able to pull this group together, and I want to just commend Lauren, Jessica, and the rest of the VCRD team for making this happen today. But as we sit here in this moment, really thinking about how we work together as a state, both individually, independently, as well as collectively together. And I think, Vermont is truly a special place because we all connect well together, know each other. And I think this idea of having an abundance mindset is really important, and it's something that I'm trying to model and shape, and really thinking about who we are together and not individually, getting out of this scarcity mindset that is, I think, what part of the federal administration wants us to be in. And so I'm just, again, incredibly grateful to everybody here, incredibly grateful for the VCRD team for being able to put this together. And I think we are stronger together, and hopefully we can continue that theme. We are moving forward with our summit on August 11th, if somebody hasn't mentioned that yet. And we'll look forward to seeing you all there at the Vermont Technical or Vermont State University and the Randolph campus. Thank you so much again for being here today.
Yeah, and thanks to our panelists. I'll just name them one last time. Bonnie Waninger from VLCT, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, Martin Hahn from Common Good Vermont, Melissa Bounty from the Central Vermont Economic Development Corporation, and Chris Cochran from the Department of Housing and Community Development. Thank you all so much for coming. We will follow up with the resources, the recording, all that good stuff as soon as we can. Definitely expect it by next Monday, if not sooner. Thanks so much for joining, and please feel free to reach out with any last questions. Take care, everybody.